When Billy Wright of Martinsville, Virginia, passed away, his great-nephew, Michael, began cleaning out Billy's basement. Well, in the midst of all the clutter, Michael found a box containing Billy's comic book collection. He mentioned it to a coworker who said, you know, you should see if that box contains Action Comics #1. That's the very first appearance of Superman. And it did. And Michael began to realize he had found something very, very valuable. Well, the collection featured other famous issues from the 1940s, including the first appearance of Batman in Detective Comics #27 and Batman #1. And those two issues were auctioned off for just a tad under $800,000. And all told, the comics found in the box in the basement were sold for $3.5 million. Now, when you hear a story like that, do you ever think, man, I wish I had something in my house that was valuable, some kind of treasure like that in my home? Well, the fact is, you probably do have precious treasure in your home, and it may be lying around neglected. They are the unique prophecies that God has spoken over you and your family and your future. So, you are watching an In Favor teaching series called Treasuring Your Words from Heaven. What to do and what not to do with the prophetic words that you receive. And we are walking you through 14 ways to respond to your personal prophecies. We're assuming that you've received a prophetic word or two or a dozen or 100. God gave someone a revelation for you. They listened to that prompting. They prayed about it, and then they did their best to communicate to you in their own words what they felt God was saying. And you were just thrilled that God had sent you a personal message. And you were very, very careful to record the prophecy, response #1, right? So, this video describes response #2, the very next thing you should do after receiving and recording that prophecy. The repeated action you should take is to review it. Review that prophecy. Read it again, over and over. You know, those comic books were of no benefit to the owner because he left them sitting around unnoticed and gathering dust. And that's why this second response is so crucial. It's to repeatedly review the prophecies that you have recorded. Read them over and over. Listen to them regularly. Don't put them on the shelf and forget about them. Meditate on them. Don't ignore them. I'm always a little surprised when I ask somebody that I know, do you remember that prophetic word that so-and-so spoke it over you on such and such a place at that time? Do you remember? And they say, oh, yeah, I remember that. And I say, well, what was it that they said about your family and your children there? What was it they said about how you would get out of this situation? And when I ask them that specific question, they get that faraway look in their eyes and they say, well, it was something, you know, I can't really remember, but man, it sure made me feel better then. Well, you know what? That tells me something. Someone who took their prophetic words seriously would, first of all, have recorded the word so they knew exactly what was said and could turn to that at any time, and they would have reviewed it faithfully. Then they'd have been able to answer me, well, you know, I was just listening to that prophecy the other day, and I realized it had come true. Or, yeah, I just read over that yesterday, and I know exactly what was said, and I'm hanging on to that, and I'm believing for God for it today. Reviewing your prophetic words is one of the foundational responses. This is how you keep them in your heart and in your mind. Don't make the mistake that I made. One evening after speaking at a nearby training center, Kim Chambers, who's a very powerful prophetic person, well-known and well-respected in our region, she approached me and said that her husband, who was a successful businessman, really appreciated my teaching that evening. And she said, the Lord gave me a picture while you were speaking. I saw you sitting across a table from businessmen, speaking to them. They were listening to you, and they were interested in what you are saying. I take that to mean that the Lord may have a ministry to business people in your future. I was able to read that to you, by the way, because we recorded that. I thanked her, but I was very dubious when I heard that word. And on my way home, my wife even asked me, what did you think about that word that Kim gave you? And I said, I think she missed it on that one. I mean, Kim's usually very reliable, but you know, I don't know anything about running a business. I don't know anything that any businessman would be interested in hearing. I have nothing that would help them. No, I think she blew it on this one. I think this was a strike. Now, I made several mistakes there in the car on the way home. First of all, I didn't discern the prophecy correctly, which is the next video. I totally dismissed the word, and in doing so, I was treating it with contempt. That's response number 6. And I limited the word by assuming I had to be advising business people on business matters. Don't limit it is response number 7. Well, not long after this, we and some friends founded our charity called City Changers. And what we do is we organize intentional acts of kindness to help transform our community and make it a better place. One of the first things we did was join the Chamber of Commerce. And it was a wonderful experience. It gave us considerable exposure to the amazing men and women in the business community of our town. Well, several times a month, I found myself sitting across the table from business people, employers and employees. And when I explained what we do, because that question always comes up, who are you with? What do you do? As I explained that, they were always very interested in what I was saying, and they wanted to hear more. It was like deja vu. I was doing precisely what Kim said I would be doing in her vision. I had many opportunities as a result of joining the chamber. I became a director and then an ambassador, and eventually was invited to speak to the entire group several times. And I never once talked about running a business. You see, but it was when I was reviewing my prophetic words that I came across this, and I realized with a start, whoa, this is already happening. And it was just like the prophetic word said. I didn't realize it. Don't let those prophetic words you have received gather dust on the shelf. Don't forget about them. Review them regularly. Remind yourself what God has said, and remind God what he has said about you and your future. Keep them accessible. Keep them within reach. Keep them in a file or in a binder or on your phone, your iPad, your laptop, or on 3x5 cards so that you can review them regularly so they're always in front of you. If hearing from God is important to you, then treasure these words from heaven. How can you make this response your own? Here's a quote from Barbara Wentroble, who said, "It is very important to keep our faith strong during times of waiting, because if you've received a prophetic word, even just one, chances are you're waiting. You're waiting for some things to manifest." She says, reviewing the prophetic promise is like pouring water on dry ground. I like to read the words, she says, or if it is available, listen to a recording of my prophetic promise so that my faith is strengthened. The desire for God's promise becomes a tree of life and encourages us during those times of waiting. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 meaning, well, what prophetic words? Or 10 meaning, I got all my words accessible, I review them regularly, I'm reading over them or listening to them every day. On a scale between 1 and 10, how would you evaluate how you manage your prophecies? How is your stewardship of the prophetic promises God has given you? How are you stewarding them? What grade would you give yourself? So, are you satisfied with that score? And if you haven't looked over your prophetic words recently, then stop listening, turn off the video, go find them, dust them off, and begin reviewing them. Reread them, review them. The next video, the response that begins the process of taking your prophetic words off the printed page and places it directly and firmly in your heart and in your mind. You've heard it, you've read it, now it's time to understand what it is that God has said to you. See you then.